Good morning, everyone. So today we have a panel of distinguished speakers ranging from the OECD to the European Commission. Warm welcome to everyone discussing the European green transformation. So Europe has seen quite an interesting time since the beginning of March, when COVID-19 outbreak started and many of the developed and developing economies went into lockdowns. This has lasted now for more than 6 months. We are currently undergoing what some call the second wave. We are also seeing major economic contraction. Some estimates show that that might be up to 12% within the EU. In addition, the economic deficits have actually ballooned because different economies have been promoting and helping their businesses stay alive and provide employment, something very important in Europe because economic activity has almost stopped in many parts of Europe. Some economies will be much harder hit because of their exposure to tourism. Others will fare probably better, so it won't be symmetric effects. So today, to discuss the opportunities and challenges that we face to create a green transformation post-COVID-19, we have a range of great speakers. So we will start with Maria de Mertzis, who is joining us from Bruegel. She's a deputy director at Bruegel and previously was actually at the European Commission and the Dutch Central Bank. In addition, Maria has held various academic positions at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government and the University of Strathclyde in the UK. Maria is also a frequent contributor to Vox EU and is a commentator on banking and finance. So, Maria, the floor is yours.
Welcome from Brussels, as you said in the introduction. It's a real pleasure to participate in your event. I think there is a lot to be said about very important issues. Let me perhaps concentrate on the green recovery, because I think this is the subject of our discussion this afternoon, and say a little bit about the challenges as we move forward in terms of trying to meet the ambitions of the green recovery, but from a point of very big disadvantage, as you said in your introduction, coming from the situation where we are now. And in fact, the economic shock that we are facing, it really is a once-in-a-lifetime shock. And it is, I think, much bigger than we anticipated. And we haven't seen the end of it yet. We've got some very good news this week coming from the development of vaccines. But in all chances, we are not going to see a real end to this process for another year, at least when the vaccine has been distributed. So we have to make do with the fact that we need to set our priorities differently now than we would have had perhaps a year ago. And the priority now is, first of all, the health issue, ensure that we don't lose any more lives than we absolutely have to, ensure that our own citizens remain healthy, and after that, contain the economic costs. And here you really see policy reaction has been really decisive. And certainly at the country level, but also at the EU level, all European institutions have reacted in ways that is actually quite definitive in terms of dealing with the problem, but also quite different to the reaction that we've seen from EU institutions back in 2010 in the financial crisis. So this is good news. We are doing things and we can see these things bearing fruit. So I think this is important. So I think the answer to the question, are our priorities changing? The answer is yes. Yes, they are changing. We have to deal with the priority of the pandemic first, and only then decide the priorities after that. But I think what's also interesting, and I'm very encouraged by that, is the fact that the political buy-in, which is only enabled because of societal buy-in, to really move on with a green transformation is still there. This hasn't moved away. I think it's delayed because of the change in the priorities, but it hasn't moved away. And this is really very encouraging. I think the European citizens, on average, and possibly best in a world context, are very determined to see a green transformation and to see it being done sooner rather than later. So I think here there is a momentum building up, and I think it's important for all policy makers to seize this opportunity to make a difference and make progress with achieving some of increasingly ambitious objectives of reducing climate change, reversing climate change, and the energy transition. And here I think it is the time to put meat to the bones. It's not about just defining ambitions, it's about how we're going to do it. And it's not just at the policy level. I think it's important for all of us to ask the question, how does our personal life need to change in order for these ambitions to be met? Because this is the big thing. All the way from the way that we travel, to what we eat, to the way we insulate our buildings, to the way we travel with the cars, all of these things is the meat to the bones. And it's not just at the macro level. Every single one of us has to see how we're going to address that. Policy is going to help us. It's going to enable us. It's going to provide incentives. But I think the mindset that we need to come in order to see a consistency between our objectives and our actions is at the other personal level. I think this is crucial for us to realize. Beyond that, policy can do things. And, if climate change is as important as we think it is, then everybody has a role to play. Every single institution has to do things, from taxes all the way to monetary policy, because now you will see there is also at that level we're discussing what can monetary policy do. Banks, how can they finance green investments? How do we have a financing of all these ambitious objectives? So this is a consistency. I'm really arguing for a consistency in the policy that comes from individuals all the way to the policymakers. And, I just want to emphasize this point, and perhaps we'll stop with that and go into the conversation afterwards. But there are inconsistencies in the way that we are moving forward, and these require dealing with. I'll give you just the one inconsistency, and that is the footprint, the carbon footprint of our consumption, of our production in the EU is decreasing. The carbon footprint of our consumption is not. So we don't like to produce things that pollute the environment, but we like to consume the things that pollute the environment somewhere else. I think this is an inconsistency. We need to move away from that. And just like this one, any other inconsistency, and there exists, and we can go into that if you like later on, need to be squared in order to make sure that not only we move forward, but we actually see visible results in the very near future. I'll stop here and I'll come back in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Maria, for excellent points about the need for policy coherence and also coherence between policy and action, and outlining the fact that actually it is up to all of us within our sectors to actually work towards it, because every single sector will have to act and react to the greening of different businesses and practices. So to move on, we have Helena König, who's joining us from the European Commission. Europe has been a leader in a lot of sustainability initiatives, including sustainable finance. It has also a new climate ambition, trying to go carbon neutral by 2050, trying to align different policies on the journey there. So Helena is embedded in the Directorate General for Trade, where she is currently the Deputy Director General responsible for bilateral relations with Asia, Africa, Caribbean, and Pacific. She works on services and digital trade, investment and trade and sustainable development. So extremely important questions there, of course, about carbon, tax adjustment, and so on and so forth. Prior to that, Helena has worked with ASEAN for a long time before joining DG Trade. She was Deputy Head of Unit of the Southeast Asia Unit in the DG for External Relations. So very warm welcome to you, Helena. We're very excited to hear your thoughts from where you're sitting within the European Commission.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here, an extremely important topic, and I'm looking very much forward to the discussion. I'm going to focus a bit on the European Green Deal, which is, of course, is in a sense our strategy for going out of the current crisis, for renewing our economies altogether, and linking that to trade, and starting with the firm statement that trade and industrialization can and should play a positive role on climate and environment. I would argue that it already does, but we have to do even more. It is clear that trade has a positive effect on the environment in the sense that it gives us access to new resources, new technologies, a more efficient use of resources that are available worldwide. really can and should make sure that it improves efficiency of production, which then should be euro of GDP, we enjoy a bit cleaner. On the Green Deal itself, many of the Green Deal initiatives focus on autonomous EU climate and environmental policy measures, even though many of them have and trade implications. So we shouldn't lose fact that the green has external aspects, for example, on the Paris Agreement, which are very central to the success of it. On that account, trade already is an input in helping to ensure that our ambitious Green Deal policies are designed in line with international commitments. But I think we need to appreciate that it's not only international commitments and living up to the international commitments of the EU that we're talking about. We have to make sure that future international policies are also leading the way and where we want to go in the future. And there again, trade has a very important part in playing in the ecological transition. I think we are pretty clear the track record. The EU has been a global leader in making trade policy more climate and environmentally friendly. I think it started really rolling out under the previous commission, but now, of course, it has further increased in speed. And our role is very much also then to establish a framework for positive developments of different countries when we go forward in making our world greener. Part of it, of course, is multilateral level. WTO is part and parcel of that. Or institution to bring that forward. You are aware that we were very active in supporting the environmental goods agreements efforts for liberalizing trade and investment in green goods. It did work out at the time. It was paused in 2016. But of course now we have started another reflection on how we can renew, and this time in a way that will make us succeed in the WTO climate trade initiative. We are suddenly noticing that there is a lot more interest from countries around, and I think it's time really to build on that push. We're talking about a broad multilateral initiative, which is broader than the environmental goods agreement, on goods, on services, cost transparency, and we also want to, of course, remain on the focus on goods and services mitigation. We also work very much bilaterally on it through our free trade agreements, where we have extremely ambitious trade and sustainable development chapter, which include a wide range of climate-related provisions. I think it's fair to say that there we talk about rules, we're very much living up to international commitments. So we're not talking necessarily of additional rules that would come on top of what is internationally, but actually reinforce our commitments between partners to living up to what we have promised and being more ambitious on the bilateral level. So that is key, whether it's relations to services, public procurement, indeed energy and raw materials, and how we can make that really. And of course, this agreement is essential for our thanks.
Thank you. That was fantastic. It's very interesting to see how active the European Commission has been. It's been very welcome to see it pioneering some of the trade discussions as well, which has been quite a big issue worldwide for the last 4 years. So it's good to see somebody trying to work on the trade issues. Next, we have Masamichi Kono, who is joining us from the OECD, which is a Paris-based think tank that is working on better policies for better lives. That, I believe, is the motto, which I think encapsulates a lot of the OECD's work across different sections. So Mr. Kono is working on OECD policies on environment, green growth, and financial and enterprise affairs. He also represents the OECD at the Financial Stability Board, and he has had a very long career in financial supervision and regulation of financial services, both in Japan and globally. He was Vice Minister for International Affairs of the Japanese Financial Services Agency and the co-chair of Financial Stability Board Regional Consultative Group for Asia. So he has had a very long, illustrious career, and we're very excited to hear from you from the OECD perspective.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I hope you can. Yes. Good morning from a lockdown Paris. And thank you so much for your kind introduction. It's really my great pleasure and honor to be joining you today. Needless to say, this crisis is really terrible. It's one of the worst global health, economic, and social emergencies that we have ever experienced. As others have already mentioned, and in the previous sessions as well, we need to find opportunities for us to rebuild our economies to be stronger, more resilient, more inclusive, and sustainable. And the OECD has been trying to do its best to lead this effort. And last month, OECD ministers affirmed their commitment to boost growth while advancing towards circular and carbon neutral economies. And of course, the EU is at the forefront of this, with the pledge to become the world's first climate neutral continent by 2050. But several other OECD members have also committed to achieving net zero emissions by 2050, and we see the momentum building actually. Many governments have already included green recovery measures in their stimulus packages, those massive packages that, of course, we do need and we now putting in place. But there are still many governments that have not joined forces and continue to support activities that in a way undermines progress towards an environmentally sustainable transition. The EU countries are leading by agreeing to devote around 1/3 of the recovery fund to green projects and to do no harm to the EU's goal to become climate neutral by 2050 with the remaining funding, which may not be specifically earmarked for environmental spending. But anyway, again, there are some examples of governments that have not yet embarked on this green recovery path. And there's also an issue of development finance because, of course, this is a global crisis that needs global measures to counter and to also, of course, we need a global recovery. And leveraging the billions of public development finance to reorient trillions of private sector finance for sustainable recovery in developing countries is also a big task that we have. That is, of course, public development finance is important, but that is not sufficient to enable developing countries to make possible a sustainable recovery. And so actually, according to our latest analysis, climate finance provided and mobilized for developing countries rose by 11% in 2018 to the order of $78.9 billion US. That's already an achievement, but we need more, and we need more private finance. Now, when we come to talking about finance, of course, we need to finance investment in infrastructure, and this is really a critical pillar that will enable a green recovery, and of course, to enable a low carbon transition. Again, we've estimated in the past that something like annual infrastructure investment of 6.9 trillion US will be needed every year between 2016 and 2030 to meet the development needs and, of course, to make those efforts climate compatible. But there is a major shortfall. I mean, our estimate has been something like between 3.4 to 4.4 trillion US per year at the moment, and so there is this shortfall that will, of course, have to be somehow addressed. And sustainable infrastructure investment is really an important opportunity to enable this green recovery. And well, this is to, of course, to talk about transport, about urban infrastructure, about communication infrastructure, and so on. So there's really a lot to do. Anyway, our call and from this ministerial meeting that we had, um, we really don't want to let a good crisis go to waste. I mean, it's not a good crisis, but at least this crisis should be turned into an opportunity to build back better and to really design and act for resilient, sustainable, and inclusive outcomes. So the rest I can elaborate in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A great overview of building back better and how do we actually bring also the developing world on board, especially because some of these transformations will be more costly. So next we have somebody who I think will provide a very interesting perspective, very complementary to Mr. Konos. We have Bruno Pozzi, the Director for Europe for the United Nations Environment Programme. He's a diplomat of over 20 years of experience in high-level diplomacy, having worked in many different countries, including Japan, China, South Africa. He was the actually one of the diplomats also in Kenya, working as deputy head for the delegate of the European Union there. And he's a strong advocate of multilateralism and the need to put environment at the center of action. So we're very keen to hear from you. The floor is yours. I believe you might be muted. We can't hear you yet. Okay, while we try to sort out that small technical glitch, why don't we then, while we're waiting, go to Nasser Nureddini, who has joined us from North Macedonia. And he is sitting at a very important position in the country. He's the Minister of Environment and Physical Planning. And so from a government perspective, we'll be telling us some more what are the actual challenges and opportunities that governments have to deal with, especially in this post-pandemic green recovery phase. And Nasser started his career in the field of banking in Vienna and then moved around a bit. I believe he worked in London, where he worked on stock exchange listed companies. He became vice president for proprietary structured finance and equity derivative investments in the emerging European markets at UniCredit Bank. So he has a very solid financial background as well. So the floor is yours. We're very keen to hear from you from a governmental perspective.
Good morning to everyone. First of all, thank you very much for organizing this event. Dear distinguished panelists and everyone else, I hope everyone's in good health, first of all, which is the current situation we're in. Thank you very much for actually this opportunity. We are looking at our situation from different sides, of course. We are a EU candidate country. So we just recently, actually, the Prime Minister Zaev just recently signed the Western Balkan Green Agenda in Sofia. So we are a country that is actually striving to achieve those goals that are being set by the EU Green Deal. However, though, one of the things that we see, of course, we have a different stance, a different situation we're currently in. The goals are similar to the EU countries. However, we are a developing country, which some of the fellow panelists already mentioned. Our challenges are slightly bigger than the others. However, though, as Mr. Konos so rightfully mentioned, in every crisis, there are opportunities that we can actually grasp and take on. Our key focus for now has been, due to the fact of the financial means we have, of course, has been to actually the health of our citizens and to support the health system. At the same time, though, the second step we're actually looking at is we have economic packages, we have worked on those, we're supporting the private sector, of course, and the employment of our citizens. However, though, unfortunately, we haven't been able to a lot on the green package, so to speak. The reason for that is unfortunately that the funds are not substantial for us right now. Our challenges are quite big, starting off with the air pollution being one of the key ones, which links it very with the energy sector. We need to invest in our energy sector. We have a long-term strategy, of course, in place. However, at the same time, what we're working on is the vision, not only of the intersectorial, interministerial collaboration, which maybe has not been, or usually does not work that well in developing countries. So far, it's been institutions working by themselves and trying to propose. So we as an institution of the Ministry of Environment in the past have proposed a lot of policies and laws, and that is all wonderful. Of course, we've been trying to harmonize them with the EU directives. However, though, if we don't collaborate with the other institutions, it is difficult for us to actually provide the green agenda, so to speak, or use these opportunities to develop these policies. Hence why it's not only our country that we need to be looking at for the green recovery in this sense, it's actually a regional topic. We are small countries. Now, when we look at it, we got similar issues. Hence why I think the Western Balkan Green Agenda is actually a great opportunity for all of us who are also candidate countries for the EU, because we have very similar issues. Now, in this crisis, of course, that we have right now, we can try and work together, have a connected energy grid, try and move into more renewable energy, of course, and we as a country have been promoting renewable energy, are working on numerous solar farms, we're working numerous wind farms, of course. However, though, the connection between our neighboring countries is important. We find, and because we as a small country as we are, of course, and as the neighboring countries as well, we'd like to start a circular economy where we see great opportunities for us, where we can actually create green jobs, where we actually don't look at waste anymore as waste, but rather see it as a raw good, which is a commodity, something where we can actually reproduce other products. At the same time, we can create these green jobs. Now, from a government perspective, of course, we need to update our laws. Some of our laws in the past have been harmonized with EU directives. However, though, unfortunately, if you harmonize them, just copy them, it is not possible to apply them, because we are at a different stage of the economic development to other countries. So we might be not some, but maybe more years behind. And the will, of course, and standards we want to achieve are long-term. However, though, we need to actually make the policies in our country. We cannot just copy the EU policies and say we will achieve that, because the longest road. Now, our advantage and disadvantage, there's actually two ways of looking at this, is if we want to create this environmentally friendly recovery, we are quite a few steps back in the development. Now, some countries, of course, it's going to be easier for them to achieve the decarbonization by 2050 compared to us or to our regional neighbors as well, because we have we rely heavily on coal-fired power plants to generate electricity. And this actually requires a lot of investment. We, of course, are concentrating on these investments on the circular economy, the energy sector. However, though, without the support of the international community, it is going to be rather difficult for us to actually get there. We can look at different ways. Whether we look at private-public partnerships, we can actually co-invest with the country, whether we actually utilize the EU funds that are currently being offered to us. Those are the different aspects we're looking at right now. However, one of the main strategies we're looking at our country is we have a very rich natural heritage. The idea is actually to try and protect that and stimulate the ecotourism in our country. So create a green economy through that. The other one is, which I will refer to Mr. Connor's comment again, is the recovery plan we're looking at right now is where we're trying to be more sustainable is the infrastructure. So the capital investments that we're actually trying to plan for the next package in the future for 2021 and 2022 until 24, 25 are heavily relied on the infrastructure. These are the projects we're concentrating on now for the foreseeable future. And one thing that we all, this is my opinion, of course, my personal opinion, and I think this comment actually sees it, we should not look at a mandate. A mandate is too short to concentrate on the environment. We need to have a 10, 15, 20-year strategy as a country and not look for the quick political gains, because we unfortunately will not be able to realize these changes very quick in the short term. I hope we can discuss this further afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I couldn't agree more with the need for a slightly longer term vision there, so that you can start investing now so that you don't lock in some of the investment into unsustainable paths. And important point that a lot of the recovery will have to be context specific, because the local context and conditions are very different. So we have to be much more mindful of that. I believe we have Bruno back. Is that correct? I'm hoping that his microphone has been sorted.
I hope it has. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Perfect. We can
You do.
hear you loud and clear. So
Wonderful.
welcome back. So, so we're looking forward to hearing from you, since you have traveled the world, worked in so many different contexts, actually. So we'd be very interested to hear what you're seeing that as important issues that we will have to tackle in the year ahead, especially with the build up to COP.
Yes, no, thanks a lot. And sorry for that small technical issue, but I'm so glad it has been solved. And let me thank once again the organizers and the panel to give UNEP the opportunity to be part of this session on green transformation as an economic opportunity. With COVID-19, we have understood that our humanity is fragile and that we are exposed to risks. Our economies and societies are fragile and can be exposed to risks very easily. And those risks are notably those that we in the environmental field have been calling out for years now. At UNEP, we speak of three main crises, three main risks that are the climate crisis, of course, the biodiversity and nature crisis, and the pollution and waste crisis. And of course, these crises are destroying the natural system upon which our economies and societies are built. And they are driven, and other colleagues have mentioned that, by decades of unsustainable consumption and production. And COVID-19 is, in our view, just the latest illustration of this uncomfortable truth. The fact that the reality is that we've actually altered about 75% of the terrestrial surface of our planet. And if we don't do anything, we risk losing, 1 million species on Earth in the next few decades. And climate change will continue. And the science is very clear about that. But yet we remain mostly unprepared when shocks associated with these crises occur. So now, as we continue to deal with COVID-19, we must look into the future and try to seize this opportunity, this crisis indeed, to act faster on transforming our economies by linking the future economic development with circularity, with nature-based solutions, with ecosystems restorations, with resource efficiency and sustainability. We can make further commitments and take real and meaningful action. This will stabilize the climate, protect the natural world, and stem pollution. Of course, there's a cost, an important cost of transformation. It might seem very important, but actually it is just a fraction of what it will cost if we do not act now. So real and meaningful action means moving investment flows away from the current unsustainable consumption and production patterns. Let's be bold. No more financing of coal. Deforestation-free food, feed and fiber, a regulatory framework that will limit pollution and protect our climate and nature. All of this requires investment, and it requires shifting gear in the finance sector at public level and at private level. With COVID-19, we will see a number of stimulus packages, and we've seen them already in action, and they rightly prioritize the health and keeping companies and the economy afloat. That's very normal. But looking further, over the next 6 to 18 months, it is estimated that around $20 trillion in stimulus packages will come. Most of it will be based on government borrowing money. And that money, we must ensure that it makes a difference, because we don't want to leave the next generation with both a pandemic debt and a destroyed planet. So this is really the moment. And the stimulus funds that we will see in action must go towards zero carbon, nature positive, pollution-free societies and economies. This will be fueled by public and private finance in the energy transition for a healthy planet and creating green jobs. It is really a golden opportunity, and our generation must not miss it. So how should we do it? First, we need to measure and account for the impact of every economic investment. The good outcomes, like when we reduce emissions, but also the negative ones, like when we invest in economies and lose biodiversity and harm the planet. Secondly, we must put the sustainability targets in all our economic decision. It must be a key indicator factor of economic performance and must guide the economic and political decisions. Thirdly, when we build back better, let's be transparent and understood by the people. Investments into a green transition that can drive job creation, deliver sustainable growth must be explained and understood that it is for the future, it is for the humanity that we want to have in the next century. Now, of course, it may sound very theoretical, and it is, but in practice, transforming our economies into green opportunities is feasible. And let me take an example that we understand well, the cities, the housing where we live. Globally, this built environment produces about a third of greenhouse gas emissions. And the cement industry that we use massively to build the infrastructures generates around 8% of the global CO2 emissions. Now, if we look differently at the way we develop these urban infrastructure, we could also transform them into one of the most cost-effective climate change mitigation solutions. If you combine urban development, for example, with sustainable forestry, wood construction could increase the carbon sinks of cities besides the forest that we have a sustainable element. Building would provide long-term carbon sink, and especially if they are located in these urban areas where there's strong air pollution. When they would become old, we could not destroy them or let them decay, but we could retrofit them instead, making them more sustainable and long-term. And if we do that, it is estimated that 80% of new buildings, if they are constructed with more wood, more sustainable wood, they could capture nearly half of the CO2 emission currently done by the cement industry in Europe. It's just an example. Greening urban development is a level of action at local and regional level that can be really important, and it will also bring health and social benefits on top of green jobs and sustainability. At the end, it shows that investing in nature is the choice we've got to make. It's part of the solution, of the transformation, the innovation and the economic development and growth that we need to have, and that can go hand in hand with sustainable production and consumption. And it has been said, it can be achieved only if we adopt the right mindset, if we dare to build back better and use this exceptional window that the crisis has created for doing business as unusual. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Bruno, for that, for also showing us a very clear example when it comes to the retrofitting in the cities. So at the ISFC, which is a relatively new organization, we've only been established for over 6 months, and we are headquartered in Prague. What we're looking at is also just transitions and how actually there are some trade-offs when it comes to green transitions, because we need to also ensure that we don't leave people and communities behind, which is quite a tricky question often, because urbanization, absolutely correct, we have high emissions there. However, we also have agriculture and livelihoods outside cities that we also will have to tackle, and often that's going to be tough. So to achieve that, we probably need to look into better public-private partnerships, and because there will not be enough public money to lift all of the heavy load. So my next question actually is linked to public finance. How can we leverage public finance to improve the outcomes, to maybe get more private investors and private sector activity, what do you see as the most promising opportunities or ways forward? We have had decades of learning how private-public partnerships work or don't work. So I wonder if you would like to reflect on that. So we'll start with Maria, and then maybe Masimichi Kono wants to add as well. Please go ahead.
Thank you, and thank to all the panelists for very stimulating conversations. If you allow me, Linda, can I make a comment on some things that have been said, because I think that's it's very important, and then perhaps I can give you my thoughts on the financing, which of course is just as important, because without finance we will never get there. And I'd like to just make to thank first of all Mr. Pozzi for being quite so bold in his comments. I think we need to be as bold as possible, because we are really on the 11th hour here. I mean, the science is unequivocal, and it's important that we are quite as bold as he was. There really is a great value in protecting nature in everything that we do. But I would also like to link that to something that Minister Nureddini actually made, and I think that it alludes to a broader issue of distributional costs, distribution benefits, but also distributional costs. I think the benefits of greening the economy will be to everyone, but I think the costs of getting there are not going to be equal to everyone. And the minister talked about countries that are at a low level of development, and they have obviously the same targets, but they don't have the same capacity to get to those targets either as quickly or as effectively as other countries. And I think that's an important point. I think there is here a role for the global coordination of this, where we allocate responsibilities according to the capacity, because it's important not to leave people behind in this context on the country level, but also if you think about distributional outcomes within countries. I think that is just as important. It's the same argument, the argument that it's the bolder we need to be to meet the targets, the more we need to give emphasis also to the fact that the cost borne to achieve these adjustments is not going to be uniform. And I think is not a small issue, because unless we do it properly, we are going to lose the societal buy-in, which is necessary for the transformation. Without a society buy-in, if you have people on the streets arguing we're losing jobs or we're losing our welfare, we're simply not going to get there. And I think that's we should not underestimate how important the societal buy-in is. And then to the issue of the financing, I think we have made some progress, and I think we have actually picked up the speed of progress of understanding the greening of finance. There is some wonderful opportunities and beautiful ideas that are coming out. Dare I say, some of them from my own institution on how to do that. And I think it's important that we think out of the box on how to green finance. What do we mean by green bonds? How do we create liquid markets for the financing? Because as you said, Linda, that we need the public-private partnerships. Sorry, I think my screen is freezing. Can you see me?
We can see you and hear you.
Okay. I was just saying that I think the public-private is crucial, and we've made some progress. I think on the private one and how to construct markets that are liquid. Our thinking on the public, the equivalent of the public side, is only just evolving. How do we earmark funds for green investments? It's not so easy for public money is not easy to be earmarked, and I think there we need to again think out of the box. But I am really confident that the new issuance of debt from public authorities will carry with it green commitments. And there are different ways of doing that, but and as I said, we are very nascent in the way that we think about this. But I think we can take some of the ideas that we have on the private side. How do we create private bonds? I think the demand for green bonds is actually enormous, and it's increasing. So you really see that companies are thinking in what we call the responsible and sustainable way, and there is a thirst for these types of products, and I'm sure that we can carry some of those architectural designs to the public side.
Yes, thank you so much. Very good point. We have learned a lot about those structures, and Bruegel definitely has done a lot of work on that. So very important. Mr. Massimichi Kono, would you like to add to that? Because OECD has also done a lot of work on public-private partnerships, so would be very interesting to hear your perspective.
Thank you. Well, first, well, if I interpret your term private-public partnership in the broad sense, of course, I can think of many things that the governments can do to actually invite or solicit private investment in infrastructure projects that are, of course, green and sustainable. But for that to happen, actually, we did some recent research that found that actually we need better disclosures of firms, better standardized methodologies, metrics, data that can certainly inform investors in correctly pricing, of course, the projects and, of course, make them attractive for investors, particularly with the fiduciary duties, because, of course, this is not for, let's say, philanthropy, but this is for also producing reasonable returns. And so for that to happen, actually, we need much better information to be disclosed to investors and for investors to be able to use the right metrics and also compare the projects correctly. And actually, we issued a compendium of good practices for quality infrastructure investment, which is publicly available, that gives many hints on what governments can do in terms of enhancing quality infrastructure investment. And in that, there's actually also a reference to private-public partnerships, PPPs, in which, again, governance is particularly important, that there are no issues of any wrongdoing or greenwashing in that sense when, of course, we undertake those projects. And actually, on private finance, in the beyond the scope of maybe what you referred to, I can talk about green budgeting. I can also talk about carbon taxes. Those are both very sensitive and complex issues. But shall I stop here for the time being?
Yes, thank you. We are slowly running out of, so keeping the points succinct is great. So thank you so much. Helen, I was wondering if you would like to add something from the European Commission perspective on how these partnerships could work, or where you see good potential for leveraging the public sector money.
Yeah, let me go into one angle which we haven't really covered in this discussion. It was covered in the earlier comments. And that's actually looking at how we can get public support money, development cooperation, being teamed up with private investments. And it's one continent where we're particularly looking very much at that is, of course, in Africa, where we have not only through member states development cooperation coming in, but also where do the European financial institutions come into that also, and how can we join it together? I think again it's more of a rather new thing, because things are happening very quickly in the sea levels pointed out by both Marie and Bono. But it's definitely a road where we know we have to go down, sure that actually countries to live up to commitments under, which of course are different. I mean, all individual contributions to the Paris Agreement, for example, are set at different levels. But nevertheless, the challenge is very big on that. What we're doing, which I think is interesting, is we're looking very much at due diligence. And I think due diligence, there is a proposal being worked on for mandatory due diligence that will come out. And of course, climate is a very important part to look at there, in addition to human rights, other important issues. But there, I think we're not talking only about negative screening, and I think that's very important when it comes to actually direct reporting and investors looking at CSR issues like climate as supportive or a transform of of the economy by actually having more visibility and a different for reporting on this issue. And I think it's already appreciated, and I'm sure it's even more, that climate is indeed a material economic factor, taking into account of future results. And I think by putting some order in what needs to be reported by companies, you have already the non-financial reporting directive, of course, but putting more emphasis on that, I think actually will help to get more money flowing into not greenwashing investment, but real climate conscious investments.
Thank you. A very valid point about the greenwashing aspect, which we're still fighting, I guess. I'm going to jump to Bruno to hear your thoughts and reflections of what has been said this far, and any thoughts on public-private partnerships or leveraging public finance. And we will finish up with Minister Noureddini before we get some questions actually from the floor. So if you keep it shorter, that'd be great, because I'm sure that there's quite a few questions queued up as well.
Yes, thanks a lot. No, really rich discussion, and really notably also on the blending now brought by the EU Commission. I think that we transition into more energy efficiency, decarbonization. This is for sure, and therefore the mobilization of finance of this public-private partnership are in markets that have the greatest potential: renewable fuels, sustainable food, recycled, carbon neutral textile, just to say a few that are also important for developing countries. And it is really for institutions like ours, but also for those who support sustainable development, to look at this interface. How do you mobilize the initial public support that will trigger a private sector response? And through one example that comes to my mind is what we've done as UNEP with and other agencies with the PAGE program, the program on the advancement of green economy. Together with the government of Mongolia, we've created a green credit fund, which was supported by government and then brought to the private sector and allowed the Green Finance Corporation to start and provide green credits through commercial banking. So these kind of examples that unleash finance to support sustainable companies, sustainable sectors are really what we need, and that's through that blending that we will manage to have it.
Thank you. And Minister Noureddini, before we take the questions from the floor.
Thank you. I will just actually refer to Ms. de Merchis, what she mentioned, and she's absolutely, I mean, in my opinion, she's absolutely right regarding the transparency when it comes to the public-private partnerships. It is imperative for government, for any government, to actually be rather transparent with the projects that are open, considering that from experience that I've seen, not only in our country, but in other countries as well, sometimes these partnerships fail due to the fact that the transparency is lacking. The investment potential has not been explained appropriately, or obstacles are unfortunately unintentionally sometimes being laid, and thereby investors actually don't feel safe, secure to invest in it. Hence the importance of us becoming a member of NATO, starting the EU accession talks, to create this trust between us and international investors. I will refer to Mr. Potti's actually comment, and he mentioned something, a key word for us, for countries like us that are actually developing and that are of the size we are, markets. We are a small market. Hence, when we have international investors looking at us, they see the size. Hence, we don't really fall on the radar that often. That's why I'll reiterate again the regional cross-border collaboration. We're actually creating a common market, one market in the region. A lot of us, unfortunately, or in this instance, maybe fortunately, we are the same development phase. And when we talk again about linking to the circular economy, we're not going to have a foreign investor come in and build a huge facility to recycle glass or to recycle plastic or paper, considering the amount and size we have. However, though, if we create a regional plan where we work across border, where we actually have a larger facility for glass in North Macedonia, a larger facility for paper in Serbia, or Albania, etc., then we can actually create a market for the international investors. And however, at the same time, when we speak about the greening of the economy, one thing that I have actually encountered often with our citizens and the local companies is that the word itself, by the way, somehow when we speak about efficiency, energy efficiency, green economy, somehow does not come across very well, because it's automatically people associated with extra costs for some reason. We as government, we as institutions need to be more open and clear and transparent about it. When we're speaking about greening the economy, we're actually talking about also cost saving. A lot of the time, this actually also applies cost saving, especially when it comes to energy efficiency. And I probably shouldn't say this considering I come from the banking sector. We also need companies to look at the bottom line. Certain percentages are acceptable. I know they all have shareholders at the end of the day, but let's not look at a too large margin on the profit at the end. Thank you.
Thank you. Absolutely about what is actually a reasonable profit, and also about the need to build economies of scale. Coming from Latvia, tiny little country, I'm only too aware of how important that is, the regional cooperation. Now we will switch to the floor to take some questions that are coming from the audience. So if we have Mr. Bartovic joining us, please.
Yes, Linda, thank you very much for being fantastic moderator of this debate. First of all, I would like to apologize to our viewers for a small interference during this session. Hopefully it won't happen again. Now the questions from the floor. The first question I would take is related to the fiscal rules of the European Union. I will read it. Green transformation of the economies will require heavy investment that won't be covered by the amounts from the next generation EU, and will require the member states to invest and borrow heavily. Are the current EU fiscal rules still applicable to this new reality, or should the EU rethink them? So I would like to ask the panelists to take up on this question, maybe starting with Mrs. Helena Koenig from the European Commission.
Thank you very much. I'm not going to go in on replying directly to one. I think one point which was made was actually what was made by the minister earlier. Yes, we're talking about a heavy investment, but it actually, if you look a bit on the term, I'm not sure that the cost looks exactly the same, because the cost of this thing will increase substantially by the year, and I think several of the panelists have said that already. I think likewise, we are not talking about support only through funds that are given in support, and the support funds are sizable for European countries. They're very much about that. But actually, as has been said in the previous panel, we need private investments, and I personally, I think that companies, big corporations, are to factor in that transformation is actually something which will be positive for them also. Now, then, with public money there, I think where those are focused will increase. And I think, as has been mentioned, infrastructure, very key, housing, very key also, where you, even there, needs, of course, also blending with the private money, but there perhaps public money will play a role on that one. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Would somebody other like to react to that? Yes, Maria, please. The floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. There are two things to the fiscal policy that we are applying in the European Union that I think are relevant for this discussion. The first one is the New Generation EU Fund, together with the traditional multi-annual framework. So the whole budget, in other words, how do we spend this new money and old money in ways that are consistent with our green ambitions? I think that's important. I think the European Commission and the countries themselves, in the form of the European Council, have made it clear that the New Generation EU Fund needs to be spent in total synchronicity with our ambitions. And if our ambitions are on the Green Deal, then we need to spend the money on issues that are going to green the economy, and of course, we're going to facilitate the digital transformation. It remains to be seen how effective it will be there, but I think there is a very clear understanding that the fiscal money, the fiscal power that is brought to the center is consistent with the EU's ambitions when it comes to the Green Deal. That's the first thing. But I think your question was also about the fiscal rules. The fiscal rules is a fiscal framework that we have in the EU. I remind our audience that for the moment, the fiscal rules do not apply. We have lifted those rules in order for countries to be able to spend, borrow, and spend for the pandemic. Then the question is, should we go back to these rules? And my personal view is that these rules are not fit they have never been very good, and I think they're not fit for the ambitions. Just the one clear example is the fact that we don't allow for investment. I mean, if the Green Deal and if a digital transformation require investments, we need to treat them differently than others. That is not to say, and I think one of the speakers in earlier conversation said that is not to say that we don't need to have debt rules. We are going to come out of this crisis much more indebted, not only on the public side, but also on the private side. And looking after the sustainability of our finances is going to be even more important. But it's important that we invest in the future so that we make the sustainability easier. So no, I don't think the current rules are correct. I think we need to change them. And the question is how to do it in the next couple of years. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. I would maybe like to ask also Minister Nureddini. The fiscal rules are quite strict. It's 3% of GDP maximum deficit. But there were already ongoing discussions in the EU about relaxing this rule by taking out the investments out from the 3% GDP. Do you think it's a way forward? Especially if we are talking about investments in green technologies, in green transformation.
As Mr. Demirtas already said, we are facing a very unconventional, unknown time right now. There are certain restrictions, certain limits in place. Our budget has been turned upside down. Our deficit percentages have turned upside down as well. We need to all be flexible on the way we approach the coming years, unfortunately. We have never experienced such a handbrake of the economy as it has in the past. This is an absolute handbrake. We've had recessions in the past. We've had the 2007, 2008 recessions in the past, which we have experiences from the historical. However, though, what happened now is we had, for example, in our country and many other countries globally and in the EU, we pulled the handbrake from one day to the next. We brought everything to a standstill. Now, the 3% or the budget deficit rates that we have in place right now, unfortunately, we'll have to be more flexible. We are not part of the EU yet, so I cannot actually comment directly on the EU policy itself. However, though, I can say, unfortunately, that our deficit rates are increasing not just by taking out loans, but just naturally by our GDP dropping. So now that's happening to every other country as well. We're having a GDP decrease. So we're going to have to all be slightly more creative, more flexible. And the fact that we have an opportunity here to invest in the right projects when we're speaking about greening. And Mr. Kono mentioned it earlier, and I'm sure he's raising his hand. He wants to speak about this. The infrastructure projects are going to be the key. And I don't want to take your word away, Mr. Kono, trust me. But I think this is the key, and this will require heavy investments. Now, we don't want to burden the future generations. We don't leave it on them. We need to think and be smart about it, but be flexible. I think all of us are going to have to be a bit more flexible, and the people, everybody, the citizens also need to realize that certain deficit rates will be reached, maybe not seen in the past. But these are the ways out, because I spoke to our Minister of Finance, for example, and the question is, if you don't invest now, can we recover? If you do invest now, you're going to have to go into further deficit. It's a very difficult job. I mean, I'm happy I'm not the Minister of Finance, so I have to deal and balance that, but that needs to be balanced.
Thank you very much.
I'm happy to advise them to invest into green projects, though.
Thank you very much for that answer. Mr. Kono, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Minister, for recognizing me, and thank you for this opportunity. But actually, I can certainly mention that the situation in your country is shared by so many countries around the world that you're not alone in this. In fact, there are countries with even worse problems. But anyway, the OECD ministers actually they agreed to one sentence, which may sound somewhat commonplace, but I will read it. Ensuring debt sustainability should be taken into account at all times, but beginning fiscal consolidation too early could jeopardize the recovery. And this is a very heavily negotiated sentence in the statement, but ministers agreed that we should really take this seriously, that we should not begin fiscal consolidation too early. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I would take two more questions, but join it in one. Because they are related to each other. One of them is, aren't you afraid that the EU, with the heavily cross-subsidized green economy and thus destroyed price signals, loses its competitiveness? And a question which is similar to it is asking for the solutions. So what would be the best strategy to urge the states and politicians to make climate commitment when much of available alternatives are some type of economic burden? I would like to ask maybe now to start with Mr. Pozzi to address these two questions in one.
Yes, I think yes, there is a question about subsidizing the greening of the economy, but it's, I mean, state intervention is necessary to change, I think, the way the patterns we have currently in our economic development. You call it a subsidy, you call it intervention, it doesn't really matter. But what we see currently is, for example, that we invest huge, we subsidize in the Western world, and sorry to say that, but our agriculture is heavily subsidized, and it has an impact on the development of other countries, and it has an impact on the use of soil, on the ecosystems, on our carbon footprint, and so on. Now, it is about making political and economic choice of maybe redirecting that to other sectors of the economy that will be more respectful of nature and sustainability. It's of course, it's again very easy to say, and it's a heavily motivated political decision that needs to be taken. But again, the moment that we have now gives us this opportunity. The EU, with the Green Deal, has got the opportunity as well to review some aspects of its agricultural policy, for example, and create maybe a movement around the world that will look at the way we produce food in a different way. Sorry, I took that food angle. I could take many of them, but I think it's a telling one.
Thank you very much. Anybody else from the panelists would like to react to that question? Yes, Maria?
I mean, I think any efforts to funnel money into a particular sector will be subject to the same rules for everything that we have. I mean, for the moment, our state aid rules are not in place because of the pandemic, but, in the long run, they will come back. And, Europe prides itself on having very good competition policies that actually ensure a level playing field. Therefore, there isn't going to be a question of the heavily subsidizing in any different way than we do it for of course, as Mr. Pozzi said, for other sectors. I'm saying that's not going to be the different thing. But I remind you also that the climate and the climate issue is a public good type of issue. So there is a role for the state to play. It isn't a private. It's not like agricultural products, which they're subject to private motives. Here, I think we are talking a very public good, and the public authorities need to deal with public goods in ways that private individuals cannot deal with it. So, I think there is a very clear role to be played by the state here. It will not go against the state rules because we have very good in the EU, very good ways of dealing with it. And I think we need to make progress because of the urgency of the issue.
Great.
Could
Yes,
I add something on the international level when it comes to state aid / subsidies, and as Maria pointed out, we do have a very solid framework for state aid in but I think working, and we will see interventions, greening interventions, but not only green interventions. And we've already seen that mushrooming around the world in last year because of the situation. Specifically at that, is resumption rules are followed. And there we have been trying to get work on rolling out in the WTO. We've been having discussions with the Americans and with the Japanese in the last year. And I think the idea is really to make that one of the cornerstones also as we go towards WTO reform, because it will be necessary, will it be even more necessary in the current climate where we are now. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Kono, yes, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Actually, certainly, as previous speakers mentioned, there is a role for state to play. But on the other hand, I think what is important here is to make markets function where they can function, and that call for a level playing field. So particularly when the European Union, of course, deals with the rest of the world, I mean, we should really try to have the best level playing field so that markets can function properly where they can. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kono. Now, the last question, I would like to ask Maria to address it just very quickly, because we are heading towards the end of the session. How successful will be the EU in projecting its soft power in the realm of the green transformation?
Oh, you've left the easiest question for the end. Europe prides itself on soft power. Europe is not hard power, and it has absolutely no ambition to become a hard power. All the Europe has and wants to have is soft power. We are very proud of our climate ambitions, and we are hoping that we can have a leadership role here. As the international environment is changing, the US is shifting with the new administration. Hopefully, this will go. China is on board. The rest of the developing world is on board. I think there is more of an urgency for international coordination, and I think Europe there can play an important role precisely by exerting that pressure.
Thank you very much, Maria. Now, the last thing from me, my duty is to present you also the results of the poll. Our viewers, our participants were voting on the question: do you think the green transformation will help the EU's economy in the long term? So 90% of participants voted yes. They believe that the green transformation will help the EU's economy in the long term. Now I would like to return the floor to Linda for wrapping up the session. I would just like to remind you to stay tuned because we will continue after this session, after some break at 2 p.m. and 2:05 p.m. Thank you very much. Linda, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And thank you to all our excellent speakers. I think we managed to cover a lot of ground, even though we only had just over an hour. I think it's been excellent to have so many different perspectives and such a cognitive diversity in one virtual room. So thank you so much for making time, for joining us for this session. I think the main takeaways are that one way or another, we need to get there. We need to start working on the information now, investing money smartly, trying to figure out better public and private partnerships that are more transparent, that are more just, and that actually look after people's interests. And in general, leveling playing ground, very important. So regulation will play a big role going forward, as will, of course, smarter ways of investing and figuring out how we do it depending on each context. So once again, thank you so much. Stay tuned for the rest of the summit. Follow it on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, whatever your favorite social channel is. You can leave it running in the background, as I have been doing, and tuning in for the parts that interest you the most. And please feel free to reach out to me or anybody who's organizing this summit if you have follow-up questions. And make sure that you find our excellent speakers also on those same social media channels and follow their work. So thank you so much and have a successful week, everyone.
Thank you very much, Linda. Thanks to all the participants. And we will reconvene
Thanks
at
very much.
2:05 p.m. Thank you.